All right, let's talk about waiting for Godot, or Godot. I don't know, honestly. The T is silent. It's spelled G-O-D-O-T, and you do not pronounce the T. I can tell you that. I'm not entirely sure if it's waiting for Godot or waiting for Godot. There may be some difference between American pronunciation and British pronunciation or something like that. I've seen both, waiting for Godot, waiting for Godot. I think I will try to say Godot in this video. Anyway, waiting for Godot, G-O-D-O-T, waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett is an important play. It's hard exactly to know how to classify it, and that's part of the genius, part of the importance of the play, that interpreting it even enough to classify it is maybe not necessarily a challenge. You can do a plausible interpretation and classification of it, but being sure of it and giving the decisive interpretation and classification is not that easy. It is a tragedy, it is a comedy, it is an instance of theater of the absurd. These are all my tentative classifications. Somewhat less tentatively, I would say this is a perfect illustration of some version of postmodern philosophy presented in story form. Okay, so what's going on in this play? That's a good question. Vladimir and Estragon are two main actors, well, two main characters, and they are probably tramps. That's a relatively older word. What do we say now? Vagrants, homeless people, traveling homeless people. They have some sort of business proposal to someone named Mr. Godot. They're waiting for him to show up and give them an answer, and he never shows up. Spoiler alert! The first act of the play concerns their conversations and some meaningless events in the evening one day as they wait for Godot. We do not actually know how many days they've been waiting already. The second act of the play concerns their conversation and some meaningless events in the evening on the next day as they also wait for Godot. We do not know how many days they may have yet to wait. Vladimir and Estragon are not doing well. They look like they're on the way to starvation, but the boredom and the pointlessness of their endless waiting for Godot are even worse. Now, I don't know that I want to read much of this play, but I better go grab a hard copy just in case. Okay, I have a hard copy. You will find a lot of good material on the internet, no doubt. You will find good productions. I can't guarantee what's public domain and what's not. What clips are allowed to be on the internet legally with or without public domain issues. There's a nice film production starring, I don't want to get this wrong, Vladimir is played by the guy who played the Penguin in classic Batman, like 1960s Batman. And that is Burgess Meredith. My brain gets the names mixed up a bit. Burgess Meredith. And Zero Mostel. Zero Mostel is the guy who plays Estragon. Zero Mostel, I think he was Tevye in the classic film production of Fiddler on the Roof. Zero Mostel, the internet says that's not his official name. His official name is Samuel Joel Mostel. Anyway, that's a nice film production, and honestly, I think it probably should be public domain, but I can't promise that it is. Anyway, you'll find good productions on the internet, and I sure hope they're legal with respect to copyright law, or at least you'll find good clips. One thing that would be really nice that I couldn't find, even for purchase, and so I haven't actually seen it, was the Waiting for Godot production, where Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, for those who don't know, that's forget X-Men, that's Captain Picard and Gandalf, where they were in the play. I would imagine Gandalf played I would imagine Gandalf played Vladimir and Captain Picard played Estragon, but don't quote me on that. I don't know. I've not seen that production. I would like to. Anyway. The beginning of the play is well worth reading. Watch a production on the internet, but better yet, you can find it good. Read the reading. As a general rule, it's better than, well, it is a play. The play is maybe better than the book, but by all means, read it or watch a decent production. The beginning is, well, the beginning is great. Maybe I'll read some bits, not just yet. Let me keep reading I'm not reading the play, I may be reading some of my notes. At the beginning of the play, first thing that happens, Estragon is having trouble with his boots. And he says, there is nothing to be done. He's trying to take off his boot. He pulls at it with both hands, panting. He gives up, exhausted, rests, tries again. Same result. Vladimir shows up. Estragon says, nothing to be done. Vladimir says, I'm beginning to come round to that opinion. All my life I've tried to put it from me, saying, Vladimir, be reasonable. You haven't tried everything. And I resume the struggle. So Vladimir takes Estragon's remark on the futility of trying to put on his boots as the perfect illustration of, well, the futility of the struggle that is their lives, or perhaps the struggle that is everyone's life. And this is very much what you see. Estragon, mercifully, he seems, well, he's not exactly happy, but he can at least get some rest and sleep, some relief from suffering and sleep. And poor Estragon is, well, less overtly philosophical, it seems. He's less overtly aware of the absurdity and futility of his existence. Vladimir is more aware. Vladimir, towards the end of the play, is going to give some eloquent remarks on the futility of life. So, Estragon has trouble with his boots. This appears to be a metaphor for the pointlessness of their waiting for Godot, or the pointlessness of trying to do anything at all, or the pointlessness of life in general. Vladimir says nothing to be done, describes life well enough. And all the same, he still adds, I resumed the struggle. And you see in this play the resumption of the struggle for 2 days straight, after we don't know how many days, and continuing after the play, no doubt, we don't know how many days. It's hard to imagine it could go on forever, but the play doesn't tell us what happens. On the third day, well, on the third day counting from where we start, which is not the first day, they've been waiting for Godot. Anyway, Vladimir and Estragon pass the time with idle conversation about the Bible, about a small barren tree, about the possibility of suicide by hanging themselves on that tree. They contemplate suicide, they never go through with it. Remarks on the Bible are not especially good theology. Vladimir says, well, his first line, I'm beginning to come round to that opinion, namely the opinion that there's nothing to be done. All my life I've tried to put it from me, saying, Vladimir, be reasonable, you haven't yet tried everything, and I resume the struggle. And one thing he suggests to Estragon is, one thing we haven't tried yet, which you might try, is repentance, but they don't try repentance any more than they try suicide. And yet they resume the struggle. So, should you blame them for not trying everything? Should they have just gotten it over with and tried suicide? Or should they have tried solid Christian repentance instead of just continuing the futility of their meaningless existence? Should they have tried something else? Maybe. You might argue that. But you could also plausibly, I think, argue that a better interpretation of the text as it is resume the struggle is the best they can do, and maybe the best anyone can do. That makes me think of existentialism. I don't know if this is the existentialist play, but it is probably the existentialist play. It's a superb statement of existentialism. At least that's one very plausible interpretation. Maybe we'll get to that later. All right, so Pozzo and Lucky arrive. Pozzo. I think the only pronunciation I've heard is Pozzo. It's P-O-Z-Z-O, P-O-Z-Z-O, P-O-Z-Z-O. Pozzo and Lucky arrive. They are a very strange pair. Pozzo seems to think very highly of himself, as if he's some sort of very rich guy. He walks around with his servant Lucky. Lucky has a rope around his neck. Pozzo holds the rope. Pozzo eats some chicken. Estragon chews on the bones. Pozzo yells at Lucky. They discuss Lucky's confusing behavior. And again, it's well worth watching or reading. Now, Lucky at one point gives a speech. It's supposed to be a representation of brilliant thinking, or representation of someone who could once think brilliantly. Let's see if I can recall correctly. Pozzo offers to Vladimir and Estragon, here, I can have Lucky give us some entertainment. He used to think magnificently. Watch him think, it'll be great. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Read the script, or watch a good production of it for more accurate representation than my, as I recall, this is the gist of it. Okay, so Lucky gives a speech where he thinks. It's supposed to be a representation of brilliant thinking, and it starts with an imitation of some very serious philosophy of religion. It's the only time Lucky speaks in the whole play, and what a speech it is. It is a lot of words. I'm sure you can get an official word count, or you could find a script, copy and paste, and ask a word processor to count it. I don't think I'm going to try just reading it. I might read a bit of it. Oh, it might be better if I don't even try reading it. Well, it begins with, given the existence as uttered forth in the public works of Puncher and Watman of a personal God, qua, 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 with white beard, qua, 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 outside time, without extension, who from the heights of divine apatheia, divine athambia, divine aphasia, loves us dearly, with some exceptions for reasons unknown, but time will tell, and suffers, like the divine Miranda, with those who for reasons unknown, but time will tell, are plunged in torment, plunged in fire, whose flames, if that continues, and who can doubt it will, fire the firmament, that is to say, blast hell to heaven, so blue, still, and calm, so calm with a calm, which, even though intermittent, is better than thought, but not so fast, and considering what is more, that as a result of the labors left unfinished, crowned by the Academy of Anthropometry of Essie and Posse of Testu and Cunard, it is established beyond all doubt, all other doubt, beyond all doubt, all other doubt than that which clings to the labors of men, that as a result of labors unfinished of Testu and Cunard, it is established as hereinafter, but not so fast for reasons unknown, that as a result of the public works of Puncher and Wadman, it is established beyond all doubt that in view of the labors of Fartov and Belcher left unfinished for reasons unknown of Testu and Cunard, etc., etc. It's magnificent. It's insane. The speech is confusing, disorderly, possibly entirely meaningless, though it starts off with an imitation of serious philosophy of religion. Few, if any, thoughts are completed in the speech. The sentences are themselves not completed. Every thought is pointlessly interrupted by the next thought. If there is any point to the speech, it seems to be that life is meaningless. I think we can discern amidst the babble the following complete sentences. Given the existence of a personal God, man, nevertheless, wastes and pines and fades away. In other words, given what we've been told about the existence of a personal God, life is pretty pointless and ends in death. So, what shall I make of this speech? Well, I can't promise you that there's no scholar named Puncher, Watman, or Testu, or Cunard. It sure looks like he's referring to real scholars. On the other hand, maybe it looks like he's supposed to look like he's referring to real scholars. I mean, he mentions Puncher and Watman, Posse, Testu, Cunard, but he also mentions Fartov and Belcher, which doesn't sound like the names of actual scholars to me. So it's terribly confusing. And it's meant to be. The other characters are not very happy with the absurdity, the madness of the speech. Watching a proper production of it is great. I admire anyone who can memorize this wonderful absurdity that is Lucky's speech and deliver it. Okay, so at the end of Act 1, here's some stuff that happens. Pozzo and Lucky leave. Shortly thereafter, a boy arrives to announce that Godot will not see them today, but hopefully tomorrow. Vladimir questions the boy. He wonders if he didn't give them the same message the day before. The boy leaves. Night comes suddenly. Estragon asks Vladimir to remind him to bring some rope tomorrow so they can go through it with hanging themselves on that tree. So in Act 2, we see more clearly that Estragon has a bad memory. And he keeps forgetting why they're here. He has trouble remembering Pozzo and Lucky very clearly. A few times, Estragon suggests they move along, and Vladimir reminds him that they have to stay since they're waiting for Godot. It's the only thing they're sure of in life. They're waiting for Godot. In Act 2, Estragon and Vladimir seem even more dreadfully bored than yesterday. They try various things to pass the time. They try insulting each other. They talk about the tree, which has sprouted some new leaves overnight. They pretend to be Pozzo and Lucky. Eventually, Pozzo and Lucky do show up again. And it's different. Pozzo has no clear memory of the day before. And he's apparently gone blind. And supposedly, Lucky can no longer speak. How did this guy who was super rich and super important, or at least that's how he thought of himself, one day be blind and miserable the next day and no longer think he's so important? Well, that's no doubt meant to be a parable on the futility of the things we think are useful in life. Maybe a genuine moment of real philosophy, calling us back to sources like Seneca or Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, making us think of biblical sources, the Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, or the parable of that rich guy in the New Testament, who says to himself, everything's great now. You're super rich. You've got years of pleasure and contentment ahead of you. Enjoy yourself. And God says to him, oh, you fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. And he dies that very night. So this may be that. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is supposed to be that, among other things. It's probably meant to be lots of things. And it's meant to ask us exactly what it's supposed to be and not be entirely sure what it's supposed to be, or at least not everything it's supposed to be. But at any rate, it is what it is. And what it is Pozzo shows up, and apparently he's blind, and he no longer thinks he's doing well because he's rich. And this seems to be a depiction of the futility of all our efforts in life. Pozzo and Lucky, however, eventually move on, pointlessly. Pozzo gives a brief remark about how fast and meaningless life is. And I should probably read some of it. Pozzo, suddenly furious. Have you not done tormenting me with your accursed time? It's abominable. When? One day? Is that not enough for you? One day, he, indicating Lucky, one day he went dumb. One day I went blind. One day we'll go deaf. One day we were born. One day we shall die. The same day, the same second. Is that not enough for you? They give birth astride of a grave. The light gleams an instant, then it's night once more. Considering things carefully, we go from birth to death with just a flicker in between. We are, of course, meant to think of Macbeth saying, out, brief candle. This appears to be some sort of statement of nihilism, or is it? It appears to be a statement of nihilism. Life is meaningless, and yet Pozzo's last word is on. Pozzo and Lucky exit. And yet Pozzo moves on, determined to keep moving on. I left out the scene, well, I guess it's all one scene in Act 2, but I left out the episode where Pozzo and Lucky fall over and have trouble getting up, and Estragon and Vladimir discuss whether they should help them, etc., etc. I can't cover everything in this video. I don't even know. I don't even know how many things I ought to even try to interpret. Anyway, I left out that episode. But if here's back to the current scene, they give birth astride of a grave, the light gleams an instant, then it's night once more, says Pozzo, and then he says, on! And he goes on. Life is but a flickering moment between birth and death, and yet he continues. He goes on. He's determined to keep moving. If he and Lucky fall again, they will get up again when they can, and they will apparently move on. This parallels Vladimir in Act 1 saying, I resume the struggle. It also parallels the way Vladimir and Estragon keep toying with the idea of suicide but don't go through with it. So this may be not a statement of nihilism, but a statement of existentialism. There's no point to life, but we live it anyway and make our own meaning in life. Or maybe we should say, there's no pre-existing point to life, but we continue the struggle. Well, I don't know. Am I doing Camus or Sartre here? Here's what I think Camus would say. Speaking of consonants not pronounced, Camus is C-A-M-U-S. So I think Camus would say something along these lines. There's no point to life, but we live it anyway. Continue the struggle. I think Sartre, S-A-R-T-R-E, Sartre would say there's no original point to life, but we can make our own meaning in life. We can choose for ourselves the point of our life. And Sartre gives some advice on responsibly choosing the point of your life in his wonderful talk, Existentialism as a Humanism. All right, so this may be this incident where Pozzo talks about the meaninglessness of life, and I'm sure we're meant to think of Macbeth saying, out, brief candle. And then Pozzo goes on, is perhaps some existentialism layered on top of nihilism, or more precisely, not a statement of nihilism at all, a statement of there's no objective point to life, but you must keep up the struggle, and perhaps there's no objective point to life, but there can be a point to life. You just have to live it. The point of life is, and now I'm not sure if I'm saying Sartre or Nietzsche here, the point of life is to live it and to decide what you're going to do with your life. Now, this may, however, be just sheer nihilism. There's no point to life. There's not much of an escape. Even suicide is difficult to arrange, and it certainly fails to give life any meaning. So after Pozzo leaves, Estragon gets in a quick nap, and Vladimir gives his great philosophical speech. Was I sleeping while the others suffered? Am I sleeping now? Tomorrow when I wake, or think I do, what shall I say of today? That with Estragon my friend at this place until the fall of night I waited for Godot? That Pozzo passed with his carrier and that he spoke to us? Probably. But in all that, what truth will there be? Vladimir looks at Estragon now, while Estragon's falling asleep. And Vladimir says, he'll know nothing. He'll tell me about the blows he received, and I'll give him a carrot. Astride of a grave and a difficult birth, down in the hole, lingeringly, the grave digger puts on the forceps. We have time to grow old. The air is full of our cries. But habit is a great deadener. And me too. Oh, he looks again at Estragon, and then he says to himself, and me too, someone is looking, and me too, someone is saying, he is sleeping, he knows nothing, let him sleep on. I can't go on. What have I said? I'm not a skilled actor. I'm not a trained actor. I'm not an experienced actor. You want to have these lines delivered properly. Wow. Okay, so birth and death are practically the same. There's a powerful image. Down in the hole, astride of a grave and difficult birth, down in the hole lingeringly, the grave digger puts on the forceps. You're supposed to picture here as a description of how life actually is. Your mother gives birth to you right on top of your grave. The person digging the grave is the doctor delivering the baby. The gravedigger puts on the forceps. You're born, you die, and considering life properly, that's it. That's how it goes. Like Pozzo says, there's just a flicker. It's just different imagery for achieving the same thing describing the same thing Pozzo was talking about. Between birth and death is just a flicker. But habit is a great deadener. In other words, busy habits keep us from realizing the pointlessness of life. And from realizing that birth and death are practically the same. At the end of the day, whatever we did was apparently pointless. Birth and death are practically the same thing. One leads to the other very quickly. Estragon is sleeping. He's oblivious to the suffering of life, and our busy habits keep us from realizing the pointlessness of life. We, too, are like Estragon, asleep. But on the other hand, should we be happier that way? Maybe that's the right approach. Estragon isn't happy when Vladimir wakes him up. Why won't you let me sleep, he says. That's probably in a different episode, not right here. But maybe the illusion of habit is a small comfort, like the temporary respite from suffering that sleep provides. Maybe that's what we should be doing, or maybe not. Maybe we should just boldly face the truth and recognize the absurdity of life, and then, speaking like Camus, face the only truly serious philosophical question, suicide, and then reject that question, give the right answer, no suicide, resume the struggle. So as I am talking about this play, I really find myself thinking, wow, maybe it's Sartre, but it's probably Camus. Keep thinking, this is existentialism, Camus-ish variety, not Sartrean variety. There are some technical discussions here. What precisely is existentialism? How do you define it exactly? And if you give a precise enough definition, you might find Camus is not actually an existentialist. He's just a philosopher with some somewhat similar views. Anyway, all that another time, another video, maybe another channel. At any rate, I need to get back into doing more Sartre. I do have some Sartre on this channel, and one Camus, but it's not the myth of Sisyphus. It's a commentary on some of Camus' fiction. I thought I'd pause this video when I was drinking tea. I don't think I did. Anyhow, at the end of Act 2, the boy arrives, same boy, apparently. And off we go again, says Vladimir, off on another pointless cycle, like the last 2 days. The boy gives the same message as last time, while denying having ever seen Vladimir before. The boy leaves, night falls suddenly. Estragon asks Vladimir to bring him some rope. Tomorrow, and Vladimir suggest they'll hang themselves tomorrow, unless Godot comes. And you know what? I don't want to miss the very last bits. They suggest they'll move on from this particular place for the night. They'll come back in the morning. Well, shall we go? Yes, let's go. But they don't move. Maybe they'll move in 5 minutes. Okay, so, oh my goodness. How do we interpret this play? All right, philosophical, and possibly not only philosophical interpretations of Waiting for Godot. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that it's an open question, or at least an unresolved question. You're not supposed to have a final answer, and you won't have a final answer. Maybe the point is just literature. Just read the story and appreciate the beauty, not leaving out the tragedy of the story with some comic relief. I think the word tragic comedy is about as good as I can come up with. Also, you'll find that officially given there. Tragic comedy in 2 acts. I don't know if it's... I don't think the camera's quite focusing. Waiting for Godot, tragic comedy in 2 acts by Samuel Beckett. Okay, so let's look at some of the possible interpretations. Now, actually, let me just give one maybe side note. I don't know if I want to suggest this as a possible interpretation. It's a possible way of thinking through this. I doubt very much it's an interpretation that makes sense. But some details of it seem like they're so close that they almost make sense. You could give a theological interpretation of this play and say, despite whatever official answers you may have to the contrary, Godot is God. And it's not necessarily the case that Godot never shows up because God never shows up. No, it's more like God shows up, Vladimir and Estragon didn't repent, they're in hell, or something like that. Maybe purgatory, more likely hell. Let me see if I can just confirm something here. I think the boy says he works for Godot, and he has a brother who also works for Godot. And the brother looks after the sheep. I look after the goats, says the boy. So, you could actually, maybe, suggest that in this play, Vladimir and Estragon, having not repented already in hell, or maybe just some sort of purgatory, their pointless, never-ending suffering with some confusion as to how long they've been suffering in the situation. Well, this is because they're waiting for God's mercy. Maybe they'd get it if they were serious about that repentance they mentioned. And they are the damned, or at least the sinners being punished by God. There's this biblical imagery, you see, of the sheep and the goats. Find I want to say the Gospel of Matthew, maybe close to the end. Parable of sheep and the goats. Matthew chapter 25 is where you can look up the parable of the sheep and the goats. So the sheep in this parable are, well, not those who are good as such. It's not the good and the bad. It's the repentant sinners who had some faith, some repentance, and some faithfulness to God's revelation. These are the sheep. Everyone else is the goats. The sinners who are just sinners, the unrepentant sinners. So this boy who is tending to Vladimir and Estragon is the guy who works for Godot and tends the goats. So you can plausibly suggest, maybe Godot is God and Vladimir and Estragon are unrepentant sinners and they're being punished by God. And that boy is an angel. He's an angel or a demon who minds the goats rather than the sheep. This is probably an idea that's on the internet. I don't know. Honestly, I may have encountered it on the internet before I thought for myself or tried to think for myself about whether this idea works. I don't think it works. I think this is not correct. I don't think this is what the play says. I think if you ask the internet, you'll probably find that Godot is not God, and you'll find some good reasons for it. Maybe Samuel Beckett, the author himself, said so. I don't know that I need that reason. I think that's just kind of weird. It just almost fits some of the details, but it just doesn't seem to me to fit the story. I don't think you can give this religious interpretation exactly. There is a religious response to the play you can give. If my brain holds up, I'll give that at the end. I'll mention that. Although there's more than one religious approach to this play. We'll get to those momentarily. But let's start with this. I think the natural way to interpret this play is just existentialism. So existentialism, do I need to try to define existentialism? I should do a proper video sometime trying to introduce existentialism. Existentialism you could almost classify as the idea that life is meaningless, but you get to do what you want in life anyway, or affirm life even if it's meaningless, or invent a meaning for life even though it's meaningless. I don't think this is the right way to classify existentialism. A better way to classify existentialism, I think, would be there is no pre-existing or objective fact about the meaning of life, but life can have a meaning, and we need life to have meaning, and we can decide for ourselves what is the meaning of life. Now, this is the perspective of Sartre and what is more or less the official statement of existentialism. Sartre's famous talk, Existentialism is a Humanism. For anyone interested in these matters in the slightest, Existentialism is a Humanism is highly recommended reading, available online. So Nietzsche and Sartre, I think, are the real existentialist philosophers. People associated with existentialism include Kierkegaard and Camus and Heidegger and Simone de Beauvoir and others. So Sartre and Nietzsche. Here's the Nietzschean response to this play, I think. It would be something like this. There's no objective truth about any meaning to life. We should affirm it anyway. And the Sartrean response would be something like this. There's no pre-existing truth about the meaning of life, but you should decide for yourself what is the meaning of life. And then you can consider Vladimir and Estragon and ask, are they doing this well? And you might say yes, because they continue to wait for Godot. It's not necessarily the best meaning for life, but on the other hand, there is no pre-existing truth about the meaning of life. And what other options did they have? Whatever they decide is right, as long as they properly decide it. But then you might make a Sartrean critique and say, no, they're acting in Sartrean bad faith, a bit of a technical term in Sartre. Let me see if I can approximately describe bad faith. Bad faith is not actually deciding. They don't actually decide. They don't act with another technical term, authenticity. They're letting circumstances or other people decide for them. They should just decide for themselves what is the meaning of life. Don't let this Godot and his servant keep pushing them around. They should decide for themselves what they're doing with their life. But on the other hand, if they really have authentically decided to wait for Godot endlessly, maybe they're doing it right, Sartreanly speaking. You could take a Sartrean view and analyze Estragon and Vladimir and say, yeah, they're getting it right, or say, yeah, they're getting it wrong. I think that's a very respectable way of interpreting this play. At the moment, I think probably the way that gets this play the closest is Camus, though. Maybe not strictly speaking an existentialist, but a close conversation partner. So, life is meaningless. It is absurd. Don't give up. Resume the struggle. Find joy in the struggle. That's the point. And then you could analyze Vladimir and Estragon and say, well, they weren't finding joy in the struggle. They're just miserable. They're not real heroes, Camusishly speaking. On the other hand, you might find some Camusish argument that they are finding some joy in the struggle. They're looking for entertainment as they wait. Vladimir's meaningful speech at the end talks about how he waited for Godot with his friend Estragon. There seems to be a strong friendship here that survives a whole lot of suffering. And they help each other in their suffering. You might say this is a deeply touching illustration of two human beings enduring unlimited absurdity and suffering, but still finding some joy in it, and they are heroes, Camusishly speaking. That's a plausible interpretation. I think either of those Camus interpretations is probably the closest to correct if we have to choose a correct one. But I'm not going to rule all these other ones out too thoroughly. Here's an interesting one: Buddhism. Now I don't know if you Google Waiting for Godot interpretations or something like that, if you'll find there are Buddhist interpretations. There probably should be an article, if not a book, suggesting here's the Buddhist interpretation of Waiting for Godot. If that article does not work, it does not yet exist, please let me know if you happen to write it. Maybe give me a footnote. It would be proper to give me a footnote if I suggested it first. If you thought of it first, I don't know if you even know me a footnote. Buddhism. Here's a plausible way of interpreting this play Buddhistically. We go through a potentially endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, and there's lots of suffering. All this suffering comes from desire. Stop desiring, and you can end the cycle and end the suffering. So, would Vladimir and Estragon be happier if they stopped wanting Godot to come? Then they could go and do something else, right? Now, this interpretation of the play, I think, would paint Estragon and Vladimir as not getting it right. They are not enlightened. Their endless suffering continues. The play ends with another cycle. Off we go again, says Vladimir. Why? Because they haven't given up their desire to meet with Godot. Change the desire, you'll end the endless cycle. I think this is an interpretation of the play that has a lot of potential. I doubt it's correct, but it's worth some enterprising student doing a research paper or some enterprising scholar of some sort doing a published article. If the article doesn't exist, and if you write it, please let me know you did so, and give me a footnote if I came up with the idea before you did, or discovered the idea. I hate to say I came up with it. Now, here's an alternative perspective, somewhat more optimistic than some of these others. William James. Actually, the Buddhist one is very optimistic in terms of the escape from suffering it thinks we can achieve. Not an optimistic appraisal of Vladimir and Estragon, but that's just facing the suffering, which is the first step towards getting rid of it. You understand suffering before you get rid of it. I think that's a normal Buddhist approach. You rarely start with enlightenment. No, you get there, and you get there usually after you understand the need for it. Anyway, here's another somewhat more optimistic way you could approach this. William James. How good life is partly a result of what we believe about life. Believe that life is worth living, and your belief will help to make life worth living. So by all means, keep up the struggle, but add to your struggle a belief that life is worth living, and also that God will help us in the struggle. Now, William James argues carefully that belief in God is rational, which is a precondition, he thinks, for this whole approach working, but let me try to go over it again. Life is worth living, or at least it can be, but one of the things that makes life worth living is what we believe about life. So what Vladimir and Estragon should do is they should not commit suicide. They should keep up the struggle. They should add to their struggle a belief that it's all worth it. And also a belief that God will help them in the struggle. And belief in God is rational, and I don't have time to describe Jamesian accounts of what makes a belief rational. I have a long series on that. You can go find it. This is in James' essay, Is Life Worth Living? His response to the question of suicide. It's a deeply moving essay. I highly recommend James, Is Life Worth Living? William James. What was I talking about? I was giving a Jamesian commentary on some of these issues about whether life is meaningless and the question of suicide. Note that James and Camus and various others are all against suicide. And I'm giving this as a suggested way you could interpret the play. The struggle is meaningful, but part of what makes it worth it for the people living lives, is life worth living? It depends on the person living, says James. Adding to it a silly pun, it depends on the liver. Is life worth living? It depends on the liver, in this case, Estragon and Vladimir. They should make their lives worth living by believing that their lives are worth living, which will help to make their lives worth living. And if necessary, especially, let's not say if necessary, let's say, since it's helpful, also believe in God. Because it's rational. As for all we do know, as of now, there may indeed be a benevolent God. And that belief will help us with the struggle. It will help make life worth living. And a belief that helps us live is, as long as we don't have evidence that it's false, a perfectly paradigmatically rational belief. So there, I've already hinted at Jamesian views on what makes a belief rational. I didn't want to do that in this video. More on that in a series on James' book, The Will to Believe, including the essay, Is Life Worth Living? Now, finally, I mentioned there would be some religious perspective. So I started off with a religious account of Waiting for Godot that I don't think works. I think it's just barely plausible, but I don't think it's likely that Godot is God, the boy is an angel or demon who minds the sinners, the unrepentant sinners, the goats, and Vladimir and Estragon are unrepentant sinners. And then I went through existentialism, which I think is probably the likeliest interpretation. But then I suggested there's at least two other interesting interpretations that come to my mind, the Buddhist interpretation and the Jamesian interpretation, and both of those are religious interpretations. But I don't feel entirely comfortable leaving my own view is completely unstated. Now, my own view on what this play means, what is written in the text, what the story itself tells us is probably some variation of existentialism or something very similar. Not nihilism, but the escape from nihilism. The Sartrean Nietzschean escape from nihilism, alternative to nihilism, or the Camus approach. Yeah, sure, it's absurd. Find joy in the struggle against the absurdity and keep living. I think that's probably the best interpretation of the play, or very near to the best interpretation of the play, i.e. that's what the story tells us. But my own view about these matters in life is very much a Christian view. We don't have to wait for Godot. We don't have to wait for God. I mean, find a biblical passage that says wait for God, interpret it properly, and I'm sure I'll agree. But it's not like we're waiting for something that never comes. God has come. It's there. It's in the Bible. God has come. That's my interpretation of life. Not strictly speaking an interpretation of this play, but a response to the play. God has come. You don't have to keep waiting for God or God. God has come. Go and find him. Go and find the gospel. Go to the gospel to find the God who has come. That would be my life advice in response to waiting for Godot. Still, wonderful piece of literature, and I think a statement of a different perspective, an existentialist perspective on life. This video's gone on long enough. If you watch this whole thing, thanks for watching. Leave a comment, like, share, subscribe, blah, 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 the things people say on the internet. See you next time, probably for a very short video on a less depressing play, The Bald Soprano.